Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our third installment of the 2021 Hurlbut-Walker Memorial Research Forum. All summer, we have been highlighting the museum's 35th anniversary through this forum as we lead up to our 35th anniversary celebration this upcoming November. I am Kimberly Springle, the director at the Charles Sumner School Museum and Archives, and I'm excited this evening to engage with an amazing panel of individuals who enrich our city on a daily basis by pouring into its youngest citizens. If you are new to Sumner Museum programs and events, we welcome you. And if you are a repeat and frequent associate of the museum, we are happy to greet you once more. Please be mindful that this program is being live streamed and recorded. You are joining us live this evening, and that allows you to interact with the esteemed panelists by using the chat feature on both YouTube and Facebook. So, welcome. Before I introduce our panel, I would like to share a little bit about Sumner Museum. Charles Sumner School Museum and Archives' core function is dedicated to preserving the history and legacy of DC public schools and illuminate it in ways that bridge past and present. Learning and understanding the evolution and movements within DC public education is also a meaningful cultural lens to gain a greater understanding of not just Washington, D.C., but the nation as a whole. Our education system has often been closely observed, initiating first and serving as a catalyst for change as we geographically sit in the nation's capital. In addition to that, there is immense pride instilled within Washingtonians who attended DC public schools. There are people, places, and objects that strongly resonate with individuals who grew up here and also others who don't necessarily have a direct link with Washington, D.C. DC education history reverberates throughout the globe, and the Sumner Museum collection represents the many textures. This evening is very special as we dialogue about ways in which youth have been engaged with Sumner Museum. At the onset of the development of Sumner Museum 35 years ago, serving and supporting the needs of DC public school students has been the core mission by providing arts and humanities activities and also opportunities for students to obtain hands-on experience within the collection. The latter is what we will discuss this evening, youth in the archives. This evening, we will expand this conversation beyond the walls of Sumner Museum and engage in a discussion around the opportunities and impact afforded to young people who are engaged with history in an experiential way. I am truly honored this evening to introduce you to our outstanding panelists. We are going to bring them to the platform, and I'm going to start with Eileen Langholtz. For the past 11 years, welcome, Eileen. Good to see you. For the past 11 years, Eileen has been an enrichment coordinator at John Eaton Elementary School, where she works with teachers pre-K through fifth grade, providing resources in the form of museum visits, in-school performances, teaching resources, demonstrations, and presentations. Previously, Eileen worked for many years at the National Building Museum as Director of Youth Education, teaching young people about the built environment. She has a BA in history with a minor in teaching and an MAT in museum education. She is a longtime DC resident and enjoys exploring the city's rich neighborhoods and cultural resources whenever possible. It is our pleasure to welcome Eileen to the platform. We're going to learn more, just a little bit about ways that she's worked with the Sumner Museum and all around the city with our youth. Our next guest panelist is Jen Harris. Jen Harris oversees daily operations, program execution, and exhibition production of the Story of Our Schools. Welcome, Jen, to the platform. Jen founded the Story of Our Schools when she saw the potential of schools to help tell the stories of their surrounding communities, as well as provide a space to create new ones. Jen brings over 20 years of experience in photography, exhibition design, and all aspects of digital imaging. She is the owner of Jen Harris Studio, where she works with a wide range of organizations from large federal agencies to small local businesses. She has digitized and archived over 15,000 pieces of artwork for the National Portrait Gallery, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, as well as private collections. Prior to founding Jen Harris Studio, Jen worked for Chris White Design Incorporated, an exhibit design business. So we're going to show how she's wrapped all of this experience up into working with our young folks and designing exhibits in school. So you'll hear more from Jen in just a little bit. Thank you. Our third esteemed panelist is Julian Hipkins III. Julian Hipkins III serves as the NAF Academy Director at Theodore Roosevelt High School in Washington, D.C. Hipkins earned his Bachelor of Arts in History from Morehouse College and his Master of Arts in Teaching from American University. He lived in Japan for 8 years teaching English before returning to Washington, D.C. to teach at Capital City Public Charter School. Hipkins has received numerous awards, including the Agnes Meyer Outstanding Teacher Award, the George Washington University Jackie Robinson Project Outstanding Teacher Award, and the District of Columbia History Teacher of the Year Award. Hipkins received a Rubenstein Staff Member of the Year Award and has been featured in numerous articles and videos. Welcome, Julian, to our platform. It is a pleasure to have you here, and we look forward to hearing more about your work at Roosevelt and previous as well. So we're going to move into, each of our panelists will share an overview about their work and ways in which that we've worked together at Sumner Museum and also other local repositories around the city, and how each of our panelists really connect our youngest citizens, as I mentioned, to archives, primary documents, and we're going to get into a great discussion after their presentations around the impact, the opportunities, challenges, and of course, successes around connecting youth to the archives. So we're going to start the presentations with Eileen.
Well, it's great to be here, and I am excited to share what we've done at John Eaton Elementary School. So in 2011, John Eaton Elementary School, located in Ward 3, was turning 100 years old, and it was the centennial. And here's a picture of John Eaton as it existed in 1911, and primarily as it exists today. And the school is very diverse, and the goal at John Eaton was to provide kids with an understanding of their history, but also a 21st century education. But as we lovers of history know, it's hard to really leap into the future without understanding the past. Next slide, please. So one of the projects we initiated, my colleague Michelle Kerner and I, was Student Sleuth Project, investigating your school's history. We created a 3-month program surrounded around investigating our school's history. And we work with 4th graders, and we essentially met during lunch and recess most weeks to investigate our history. And it was a 3-month program. Next slide, please. And we divided that program into 3 parts. So we asked ourselves how best to celebrate 100 years of history. A 3-month program was our answer, but we decided to break it into 3 one-month modules. The first one, locating school resources and visits to historical archives. The second would be conducting research once the students learned how to do it with regard to their surrounding neighborhood, the city, their school, and the nation at large, kind of like an onion moving from inside to outside. And then designing an engaging exhibition highlighting all the information that they learned. Next slide, please. So the first section was locating school resources. So I got introduced to Kimberly Springle, and the students the school is near a metro, and so we all got on the metro and we headed to the Sumner archive. And we learned incredible things about our school. We looked at archival material. Kimberly showed us around the collection, and the kids were so excited by looking at things that related directly to them and their school. In addition, We did walking tours of the school's neighborhood, which is Cleveland Park. It's a historical neighborhood with people from the Cleveland Park Historical Society. And we visited some other historic sites in the neighborhood, in particular Rosedale, which is one of the oldest properties in the city. So that was step one, month one. Next slide, please. So step two was investigating the school, which on the left are kids from a photograph from John Eaton. And we had a group of kids investigating the school. Then we had a group of kids investigating the neighborhood. The next slide shows the historic Uptown Theater in Cleveland Park. The next slide shows what was going on in 1911 in Washington, D.C., and then what was going on in the nation, so that the students could put their school's history in a broader context, so that your school in 1911 was happening within a context of a neighborhood, within a context of a very vibrant city, within the context of a nation. Next slide, please. The other part was interviewing teachers, residents, past students, and we worked closely with the Smithsonian's Folklife department, and we had some folklorists come in and work with the students and teach them how to interview people. And the biggest lesson was listen, listen, and listen some more. Next slide, please. Then the students had to work together to come up with a creative exhibition utilizing all of the information that they had. So the top photo shows one of our Eaton students walking a visitor when we had our exhibition opening through a national timeline. Her job was to look at 1911 nationally. And each of those panels, the yellow, the purple, the yellow, the pink, the blue, is a different decade. So that's how she divided it. And next slide, please. Finally, we were only able to work with a small group of fourth grade students through this 3-month period, but we recognize that a centennial needs to be celebrated by all the students at John Eaton. So we have a local pottery studio called Made by You, so we had each of the teachers bring their class down there, and each kid made a memorial tile. And we themed it by grades. Early grades had handprints. One grade had embassy flags. Another grade had John Eaton mascots. Third grade studies DC history. So kids did monuments and stuff like that. And that is located in our school today. This slide is showing tiles like we have at John Eaton, but these aren't ours. Ours are being installed right now in our newly renovated school building, and they're fantastic. And so next slide, please. And just to finish, we loved investigating our school's history so much that we applied for a grant, and we did a follow-up program called Investigating Your School's Artifacts. And we found many, many historic artifacts in John Eaton and around John Eaton. And Kimberly this time came to our school to work with our students. And all of these documents are available off our website, PDFs that you could replicate this at your school anytime, both programs. And it's really, really, really a great experience and a great legacy to celebrate John Eaton's centennial history. Thank you.
Our next presenter will be Jen Harris with Story of Our Schools.
Thank you, Kimberly. I'm excited to be here. So the Story of Our Schools is a DC-based nonprofit that celebrates the role of our schools within DC's rich history. Through after-school programs, we empower students to research and discover their school stories and then build a permanent exhibit that shares their findings with the broader community. We began our project in 2015, and we've worked with 5 partner schools since then. We've worked with CHML, Capitol Hill Montessori at Logan, Marie Reed Elementary, Payne Elementary, Oyster Adams Bilingual School, and Elliott Hine Middle School. Next slide, Crystal, please. We begin each program by adapting our curriculum to fit the needs of each of our partner schools. We introduce the program to the students, by which the slide shows, by bringing in photographs, yearbooks, and other artifacts that the kids can relate to. These objects get the students thinking about the past and how it relates to them. Next slide, please. Then we take our students outside, right? So much learning happens outside the classroom, and we take them on neighborhood history walks. So seeing the buildings and the local businesses that they pass every day and what their historical significance is. Next slide. And this is a local business that one of our students got to interview somebody who worked there. Okay, next one. Okay, then back in the classroom, the kids get the opportunity to dive into research materials that we make available to them. From archives like Sumner Archives, we do like an initial research dig, and we collect information to present to the students and have them work with it. Next. Our students also get the opportunity to interview longtime community members. These oral histories become a part of their final exhibit. Okay, next. Field trips are a big part of our research process. Not only do the kids get to leave the classrooms again, but they get to learn how museums work and why it's important to preserve relics from the past. So here you see a student at African American History and Culture. And next slide. And here our students are with Kimberly. Okay, next. Once our research is finished, we partner with educators from the Smithsonian American Art Museum who help the students transform their research into an engaging exhibit. So here the students get to learn about curation and how to organize this research into visual, engaging content, right? Because at the end, we're not writing a research paper, we're building an exhibit. So the photographs and newspaper clippings, words become minimal, they become captions, right? And these 2 lovely volunteers help our kids really see that and how to piece it together. Okay, next. And then here this is me working with the students, and we're looking at the historical photographs that they collected over the year. The students help decide where and how they should be displayed. So we're actually standing in the exhibit space in the school. That map in the background was there before we got there, but that was going to be replaced by the exhibit. So the kids get the sense of the space. And again, how do we visually share their school story? And then over the summer, exhibit professionals take the students' research and work, and we finalize the exhibit script, which is what the exhibit will say, and all of the design. We worked with museum fabricators to build and install our final exhibits. So these quality of exhibits, these are the same quality you would find at the Smithsonian. They're permanent, they're long lasting, they require very little maintenance. Next slide, Crystal. There's another slide for, yep. So you can see like sometimes there's an AV element where we can run a slideshow. We always have our kids, the research process, you can see the photographs around that monitor to show that the kids researched and this is their work. We have big photo murals, text plaques, you'll see a timeline. So all the different elements you always see in exhibits pop through in our final displays. With the onset of COVID-19 and remote learning, we were able to switch gears to a virtual setting. All of these elements remain a part of our process, but they're tweaked for a digital interface to keep our students and community safe. I actually now have a short video of the Oyster Adams kids talking about their experience with the project.
Every single day we look through the history of Oyster Adams, whether it be by old newspaper clippings, presentations, as well as interviewing other teachers
The part of the club that I enjoyed the most was learning about the school. I learned what the school used to be like, how it was run, and how it became a bilingual school.
Oyster opened in 1926. It was named after the president of the Board of Education. His name was James F. Oyster. The school had 8 classrooms, and it served 320 kids that were all white. The school opened in Woodley Park, a wealthy area with lots of embassies. A fun fact about Oyster is that the first mascot wasn't tigers. It was actually a flying squirrel named Frisky.
And in 1980, Oyster Adams was one of the only bilingual schools in the country. The parent council raised the extra funds by giving the school more money for supplies and teachers. The students got to learn non-native languages.
Did you know in the 1990s, the school was falling apart? And the city was not paying a lot of money for the school to build a new school. So the parents took action and they partnered with the 21st Century School Foundation. And they sold half of their field to make a new apartment.
Today, Oyster Adams' mission is to create a community that values creativity and being bilingual and biliterate, where everyone is welcome.
Thank you so much, Jen. Thank you also, Eileen. It's wonderful to see representation of work at a single school and then also several schools. And we got our third presenter, Julian, who's worked in a charter school, public charter school. He's now at Roosevelt. And we're going to hear about a citywide initiative that he's been integral in developing here in DC.
Sure. Thank you so much. Well, it's great to be with you all this evening. I'm actually sitting in my office at Roosevelt. It's our back to school night. So it's great to be here. I'm going to talk a little bit about National History Day. So I've been involved with National History Day now for about 11 years or so. And National History Day is a highly regarded academic program that is held for elementary and secondary school students across the country and in some other countries as well. Next slide, please. And what makes National History Day, in my opinion, and many others as well, as you'll see, so amazing is that students choose topics based on an annual theme and then decide to present their work as a paper, exhibit, performance, website, or documentary. So that really leads to a really strong intrinsic motivation because the students are the ones who choose their topic. And this year's theme is debate and diplomacy in history. Next slide, please. And the winners of the statewide competition move on to the national competition in College Park, Maryland, which was very close for us here in DC. And the projects that are the most successful are the ones based on local history and tell a story of national significance. I remember some years ago at Capital City, some of my students, they did a documentary on Ben's Chili Bowl, and they actually interviewed Virginia Ali for their documentary. And they were very, very excited about that. Next slide, please. As I mentioned before, intrinsic motivation, one of the things that makes NHD successful is that students choose their own topics. So this allows them to focus on a topic that they are truly interested in and therefore will be more motivated to conduct research on their own. So many times I've seen students staying at school late, going to archives on the weekends on their own because the topic that they selected, they're really into. Next slide, please. A national evaluation found that students who participated in National History Day performed better on high-stakes tests. Participants also learned skills such as time management, teamwork, which are vital tools to have as students move on to higher education and beyond. So with National History Day, you can do a project on your own, or you can be in a group project. So it's really up to the student to decide what works best for them. Next slide, please. So first I'll talk about Capital City. That's where I was first introduced to National History Day. So we started in school year 2010, 2011 with just an 11th grade class. So these are students from the first set of 11th graders that I taught. And it was a wonderful experience. This is actually at George Washington University at the citywide competition. And two of the students in the picture, they did an exhibit on the Black Panther Party. And I remember riding the Metro from Capital City to George Washington University. And along the way on the train, people were walking up to them on the train, on the Metro, and asking them about their exhibit. I mean, people from all walks of life, asking them to tell them more information. And the students were just glowing, explaining their exhibit. And that's even before we got to George Washington University. So it was really like a victory. They were winners even before we got to the citywide competition. And now I'm very proud to say at Capital City, the competition occurs annually, and students actually look forward to competing in National History Day now at Capital City. Next slide, please. And now, as I said in the beginning, I'm at Theodore Roosevelt High School, and in 2019, we held an amazing competition spearheaded by one of our history teachers, Dr. Samantha Boyd. So when I found out that she was doing National History Day, I was so excited, and I helped to gather judges from the neighborhood as well as partners. And this is another huge part of National History Day, wonderful part of National History Day, is that the students have an authentic audience. So oftentimes I've found that when you have an authentic audience coming into the building, students actually really raise the bar for themselves because they don't know the judges, as opposed to talking to the teachers within the building who they see every day. So that really brings even more power to National History Day. And also our Culinary Arts Academy prepared food for the judges, which many of them tweeted about during the competition. Next slide, please. So National Archives, the National Archives downtown, was a place that our students went to many, many times. And I remember one story in particular, the first group of students I took, they didn't know that they could do research in the National Archives. They thought you had to have a special pass or you had to be with an adult. But I took all of my students that year to the archives, and we all got archivist cards. I think I had to renew mine, but they all got their own archivist cards. So they were so excited to know that the archives were, in fact, their archives, our archives, even though they had passed that building so many times growing up in DC. So that was a really powerful moment to know that they could access the archives even as teenagers. Next slide, please. So I think of the main challenge would be finding time in classes for students to work on projects. As any teacher will tell you, you have so many things you want to cover in the school year. So over the years, I found that was one of the challenges. But what really helped with National History Day at Capital City and at Roosevelt is when other teachers connected to National History Day. So you might have the English teacher say, okay, I'm going to do a little bit of National History Day in my course, perhaps science teacher, physics teacher, what have you. So when it's really a school-wide initiative, then it really moves forward, and it's not just on the history teacher to do National History Day. So that's one way to get around that challenge, that hurdle. Next slide, please. Some of the highlights, I have many. I could put like 20 slides on here, but I just chose a few. A couple of years, actually 3 different years, I went to Normandy, France with students from across the country on the Normandy Sacrifice for Freedom program. And in this program, there were 15 student and teacher pairs from across the country who researched someone who was buried at the cemetery on Omaha Beach, the American Cemetery, Omaha Beach, someone that from their hometown. So the first year I went with one of my students from Capital City, and we researched John H. Harris. I actually have a picture of his cross up in my office. And the culminating event is the students actually, we all go to the cemetery and they read a eulogy in front of the grave of their soldier. And a week prior to going to France, students do research at the archives in College Park, Maryland, about their soldiers. So it's really, really in-depth project. And students actually start research in January and we go to France in June. So I was very fortunate to go on that trip 3 times, once with one of my students and 2 other times as a lead teacher on the trip. Next slide, please. And I think this is the last slide. So 2 highlights that I'll share. One is with Ken Burns. I had the opportunity to meet him while I was serving on the Board of Trustees for National History Day. And when we started talking, I told him how much I like his film, The Brooklyn Bridge, and how I walked across the bridge with my daughter for the first time. And I thought about that documentary as we walked across. And then he shared his story about the first time he walked across the Brooklyn Bridge with his daughter. So we were 2 guys there talking about our daughters walking across the Brooklyn Bridge. And it just highlighted the power of film and the power of 2 different people from 2 different walks of life experiencing an historical object, an historical thing in a very, very similar way. In the bottom right-hand corner, I have the Los Alamos National Laboratory logo. And that's because one year at the national competition in College Park, Maryland, 3 of my students, they did a project on the atomic bomb. And after the judging was over, students go in and they collect their projects. The students went to their exhibit, and there was a card on there of a scientist from Los Alamos saying that he really enjoyed their project and that he would like them to contact him in the future to find out more information about their process. So the students were so excited to know that an actual scientist from Los Alamos wanted to hear more about their project and why they did it. So, students, they try to get awards and win at National History Day, but it's really not about that. It's about the process. It's about the research, and it's about that intrinsic motivation that the students get from choosing their own topic and researching it. So it's really a wonderful program.
Excellent, Julian. So we're going to bring everybody back. This was fantastic. I get goosebumps hearing all of this history, but I know everyone doesn't get super excited with hearing the word history, right? So Julian, ended well with the process, research, and motivation. Sometimes the research can bog you down a little bit, and we're talking about students as young as 4th grade all the way to high school age. So the first question I want to delve in to get the conversation started is, what strategies do you all incorporate to engage the students and keep their interest, on the various levels? And Eileen, I'll just pick on you because I remember one of the things that you talked about, and I know this project's been a while ago, but I remember so many high points and little pieces. But I remember you spoke about a strategy about how the students were self-selected. So do you want to share a little bit about that to kick this off?
Sure. And again, the whole booklet of documents is online. So, for example, we made a flyer, which you could really just download and use in a classroom. What we did was we went into our 3 4th grade classes and sat with the kids and said, are you interested in history? Do you like to solve mysteries? Do you like objects or things that you have questions about? Just try to get them engaged through the questioning process. And again, often we got kids that boldly said, yes, I'm interested. Others like, I don't know if it's for me. And slowly but surely we reeled them in. And that was one way we could get a group of 10 or 15 or 20 kids to work with. Now, while I regret that we couldn't reach all the 4th graders, as Kimberly referenced, I think it was more valuable to get the smaller group that was really interested and motivated to show up. So that's sort of how we got our group together.
Awesome. And Jen, what I noticed, and just like the students from Eaton and all the kids that come from Story of Our Schools, they're excited, and by the time I see the students from Story of Our Schools, like, they know a lot of stuff. They've been doing things. Sometimes, I don't want to say, I don't underestimate the students. I'll just say sometimes I'm surprised at some of the things that they point out to me, and I'm like, wow, you know about that. And so can you share a little bit about your strategies and how you get the students engaged, because they're literally jumping up and down when I see them and excited about sharing all that they know.
It's a little bit like what Eileen said, right? When we partner with our schools, we work with a partner teacher from the school. So we give a lot of that role to the teacher. What is the teacher's bandwidth? Do they want to work with a big group? Do they want to work with a small group? We have worked, actually, all of our partner schools have been different, right? Like CHML, that project had first graders to 8th grade. When we first started that, I was like, wow, that's a big age range, but it was beautiful because there was a lot of peer helping, right? For Payne Elementary, which my slideshow was about, those kids were 3rd grade to 5th grade. But for us, again, like showing how the history and how the research can connect to them. So, for example, when we bring in those first photographs, a lot of those photographs are of those kids' parents at that school. They're of those kids' grandparents, right? So they see the bigger picture. They say, okay, I am personally connected. So they get excited that way. But also it's all the hands-on stuff, right? I think that's the excitement that you see, Kimberly. It's like, you can read about anything until you're blue in the face, but until you can like actually touch it and see its importance in an archive, that's exciting, and our kids really get it.
Awesome. And Julian, as I mentioned, I have served I love to volunteer as a judge for National History Day, and you kind of see a whole range of things happening. I'm glad that you mentioned Ken Burns and like film media. And as an aside, I'd love for you to share a little bit about the various categories that students can participate in. But in circling back to the same pivotal question of how do you get students engaged, keep them interested, and I want to hear more about that, because especially dealing with like older kids and a different kind of setup with National History Day. It's a little different from Eileen and Jen's interactions.
Yes, well, I've taught middle school and high school, and I'll say that middle schoolers, if you're excited about it enough, they're going to get excited too. They want to know, they want to learn, but they'll get excited too. High schoolers doesn't quite work that way. You can be really excited, but if they don't see how it relates to them, they're not really going to get as engaged. So what I often try to do is really show why a topic, or have them go through the process on their own to see why a topic is important to them. So I mentioned the Ben's Chili Bowl example earlier. So the students that did it, they went to Ben's Chili Bowl often, but they didn't know the entire history. They knew a little bit of it, but the entire history. So once they learned about it, and once they actually spoke with Virginia Ali, it took their experience to a whole nother level. And then through that, they learned about the riots and the uprising in '68. That Dr. King was assassinated. They learned about the building of the Green Line, right, which they didn't really know about, how it runs basically directly under U Street. They learned about the other businesses in the area. So that whole process really brought it home to them, but because they had that connection to it. That's why National History Day, in my experience, it really works best when students do local history, because then they can interview people that they might see every day or pass by often, but get another layer of that experience and their neighborhood from it. So I really think just making that connection and students really understanding or getting understanding the power behind history and how it helps to make their lives richer.
Excellent. I kind of want to extend that out a little bit more and hear from you all about some more of those kind of like magical aha moments that students may have experienced. I know when Jen mentioned seeing images of parents and grandparents, I do recall a student in that first class, Eileen, who found her mother's name on a document at Sumner. So her mother attended Eaton as well. But what other, I know there were lots of cool things that came out from the Eaton project. Is there any like highlights that you recall that students kind of went bananas over, they were super excited about? Any of those moments you recall?
Well, wow, Kimberly, you have an excellent memory. And I remember a girl named Jasmine, and she saw her mom, Lori Duke, who was a student at John Eaton. And while she may have known that, I think seeing her mom in the archive made it official. And that's the thing. As a museum educator and also an educator, I'm echoing everything you and Jen and Julian say. It's the power of objects and the connectivity of those objects with those kids. Certainly young kids, but Julian just reminded me, even older kids are very egocentric. What about me? How does it affect me? I'm only interested, but I realize high school students too, they're like, I'm not going to get involved unless it's interesting. So having objects, so for each class in terms of museum education, we would always have a hook. We'd always start off with something we found and ask the kids to look at it more closely, or what do you make of it, or how does it relate to John Eaton? And even if they started out not engaged, by the end of the process, everyone is over that object. Everyone is looking at it. Can I touch it? Well, yes, but let's put on our gloves. Let's understand why we're doing this. And so we really elevated a 1930s cookbook, an old clarinet, flute or clarinet we found in a battered old closet, and we didn't even have a music program at John Eaton. So what's the connection? And lots of random photographs. And so they just sort of got the bug a little bit as we educators acted as facilitators, which I'm sure Jen and Julian will nod their heads, and said, wow, yeah, what is the connection? And just one question after another leading. And so it sort of snowballed. But again, we started each session with the power of the question and the objects at hand, and then it kind of followed.
I think one thing too that just came to mind from Eileen's comments is that I felt something that engaged the students was that they felt the responsibility of the information they were sharing. They wanted it to be correct, especially at the school-wide competition, because we had it in the gym, or at Roosevelt, we had it in the library or other spaces. So students were coming, so they realized that students were looking at their projects and actually learning from them. So that responsibility really motivated students, especially after the first year when students were learning about the program, realizing that people outside the community, outside the school, inside the school were going to be reading their work. And if it wasn't accurate, then it was on them. So they took great pride in presenting information that was correct.
That's a great point, Julian. I was thinking about a lot of the kids that I've encountered, like through National History Day competitions, have not had the opportunity to run into Eileen or Jen and have that kind of, I use the word experiential experience, like in archives and doing the work. So I see History Day is like really learning, like they go through phases. It's like after they do it the 30th and, they got it and they understand the expectations, who are these strange people coming in, that I'm showing my project to. They may hear all this, the process, but it seems very much, you can tell students who've been more seasoned with it and those who are just starting out. And it's really beautiful to see them learning and, finding out, okay, well, next year I want to do this again and improve upon it as well. So Jen, I guess the same question, any big impactful, like aha moments that you recall with students?
Well, just to comment back on Julian's comment, I feel like that final project, that product is an aha moment, right? Because, when you start with these kids and you say, okay, we're building an exhibit, everyone's like, great, and they think about like the Smithsonian's, they think about like Air and Space Museum, we kind of take them on that journey. But when they really see their research, right, and all the tiny little photographs that they've been working with all year, when they see them in these beautiful exhibit plaques and they see these adults who are like, oh my goodness, like this is important, this isn't just like paper taped to the wall. This is a real exhibit. This is a real story. And it was your research that fueled it, right? For like little fun moments with my kids, like thinking about my last two projects. And it's funny what they connect to, right? Like, for example, with Payne Elementary, there was a fire in their school. Thankfully, the original school, thankfully, nobody was hurt. But my team was able to find, and it was in the, I'm probably going to get this wrong, but I think it was in the 1980s. And my team found the firefighter that actually put out that fire. And fun fact about firefighters, they keep everything. They are their own archivists, right? And so not only did we find the retired firefighter, but he had a recording of him calling in the fire. So, I mean, again, you're just like, okay, a little fire in like the steeple, you know, not a big deal. But because we had all this information and all this stuff, we had the firefighter who put it out, he had photographs, so, you know, big ladder trucks and smoke's coming out of the building, you know, like it just painted such a beautiful picture that you could hold on to it. It wasn't just in a book. It just wasn't some guy talking about it. It was all these elements like rolled into one. And that was like one of the highlights of our research. And it was a big portion of our exhibit, right? Because now, okay, so there was a fire and that eventually led to that building being torn down, right? So now we see what happens next, right? And the building was, of course, overcrowded and there was all these issues with it, right? So you get to really see where that fire kind of went into the storyline.
Excellent. Wow, that's fascinating.
I just wanted to add one more point. So Jen does a very slick Smithsonian style exhibition, which then stays in the school. I love it. Ours was really whatever materials we had with me and my exhibition experience with spray mount and whatever leftover paper. And the effect was very similar. Everyone was so proud of the product. Even though it wasn't as fancy as yours, I just think having it out there on display with the accurate facts and being the authority, certainly the better it looks, the better, but it has to look good so they feel good about it, but it doesn't have to be super expensive or high glossy. And probably Julian with History Day sees the gamut of that stuff too.
Yeah, I'll say yours. It was a temporary exhibition versus the permanent, and the difference. I'm glad to see the progression, because speaking of how the Sumner Archives is used, what was happening with a lot of school modernizations is there were, you know, budgets that were allocated for school modernizations, right? And you have these architects coming in, doing quick research about building structure and not really delving into the guts like you all do as far as the history, but really more from the aesthetic point of view, trying to, you know, maintain the integrity of the building through the architects. But then, you know, there are school communities that hold on to their history, and they want to see it, you know, show up in the finished product. So what was happening was you have people who weren't really skilled in that regard, but there was maybe budget allocated, like do this mural or do something about the history over here on this wall. And it didn't come out too well. So with Jen's project, with this more, you know, permanent exhibition, it's been great to see, you know, modernized schools like Marie Reed that had an exhibition in the, you know, when you enter the school, you see it. It's a permanent installation. There are letters like from the original school building in the, you know, in the exhibit. There are components there. So it's a nice, they both serve a perfect, you know, example. Like Eaton, I was there for the opening. It was a real exhibition opening with, you know, juice and cookies and snacks, and the kids were all dressed up, and, you know, the impact is the same in that regard. It's just a different kind of installation. But it's needed within the system. I mean, I'm pushing for it, you know, as far as folks walk in the building, they get a sense of what's going on with the history. And that happens, you know, even still with Eaton, because the students have gained something that they're going to carry on. So beyond exhibitions, let's talk about the impact, memories and impact and involvement. Do you all have any commentary or examples of how these experiences you've had with students, how that has resonated over the years? Any success stories of burgeoning historians or anything like that that you want to share, how this could have helped maybe change the trajectory of what a child was thinking they might want to do for a career, or just how it may have impacted them long term?
I've had students over the years say that it really prepared them for college.
Okay.
Because in National History Day, you have to do an annotated bibliography. And for many students, they've never done an annotated bibliography before they do National History Day. So they say when they got to college, it really, really helped them when they were writing papers. And in terms of research, I've had students come up to me and say, I remember that project I did. It really helped me to see the world differently. I remember one young man, I never taught him, but he did a project in National History. I think he was a freshman the year before I left Capital City. And I saw him years later. At this time, he might have been like 19 or 20 years old, but I recognized him still. And I said, I still remember your project. He made he did something on like Spartan, and he made a helmet. And I said, I still remember your helmet. And a look on his face, he said, you still remember that? And I said, yes, that was incredible. And he's like the pride. Yeah. And I said, do you still have it? And he said, I don't know. But he said, I can't remember. I can't believe that you still remember that. But just, of course he remembered it, and it just brought back so many memories for him. So when students do projects like that, I don't believe they'll ever forget them, because of the depth of research that happens when they're doing projects like that, and that authentic audience, and the impact that they're having on others. So I've seen a huge impact on students over the years.
Excellent.
I think.
Well,
go ahead.
No, go ahead, Jen. No, let's do the opposite. You go.
Okay. I think also being able to really research something, right? Like, especially today, we get hit with so much information, and there's so many different sides to everything. Like, teaching these kids how to really dig for themselves, I feel like that is a lifetime skill, right? Like, how do you really find the answer? And like, the answer for my project is like, what is the history of our school? What is the history of this community that is around this school, right? And being able to think like, okay, I can hit archives, I can talk to long-term residents, right? There's all these different avenues that we can go, that we can piece together this story and get as much information as we can, and really like think critically, right? Like, how does it line up? What makes sense? I also think, like, with Story of Our Schools, one of the biggest things for me, and has always been this way because I've always been a visual person, and having a career in the arts has always been, it's all that I could do, right? So I feel like anytime that I can introduce a student to like, hey, do you have a visual brain? There's a lot of professions out there that you can use that big, beautiful visual brain, like, and you don't need to be the top student, you don't need to be this or that, it's how you see this stuff and how you can organize it, arrange it, and then share it, right? So those are my impacts.
That's great.
So with Jen and Julian, you have a lot of product, and I did too, and you have very specific projects that happen year after year. Mine happened for the centennial, and then I had a new group with a follow-up on artifacts, and we did the same kind of thing, and we talked about preserving and being more curatorial and all that. But after that, I work at school doing a wide variety of tasks. Beyond that, I went on to do other great things, but didn't focus on that anymore. So my kids that did these projects are in college now, and I could recall a lot of them, but I regret, I don't know if it impacted them on the long term. We did not do any longitudinal study, or no one has come back to me and said, hey, I'm studying history and it's all because of the John Eaton project. So, if I see any of them on the street, I want to say, hey, did that project impact you? Now, I know deeply in my bones, I know for a fact it impacted them a lot at that period in time, but I don't know 10 years later if it had an impact. So I regret not knowing that, because I feel as though I majored in history, and I've always been interested in objects. And I feel if those kids self-selected and signed up when they did, as I explained earlier, I know that it somehow had an influence, but I regret that I don't know that for sure. So
it's 2021, so it's time for the 10-year reunion.
I know. Well, you got me thinking about that, because I was reading your questions and thinking, Yeah, I regret. I can't speak to that, and that's a definite shortcoming, and that's too bad.
I think it's really hard to keep up with students too, right? I mean, that's an issue that we run into all the time, right? You know, you work so closely with them for like a year, and then, you know, as the years go on and they leave elementary school and they go on to middle school, like we have a couple kids that we'll bring back in to do like history day or be on our panels. But, you know, it is really hard just to keep track of everybody. I think every organization wants that, you know, and they want to know what that answer is, but it's tricky.
Something I thought about listening to your comments was the critical thinking aspect of doing research. And for me, that's a transferable skill that students have also mentioned over the years, regardless of the field they go into, because when you're researching, you're looking at so many different pieces of information. You have to take a critical eye to it because you can't include everything. So you have to figure out what is accurate, what's not accurate. And, you know, that skill will serve students for the rest of their lives. So I definitely think that critical, you know, the critical lens, the critical thinking is huge. And students take that definitely from the National History Day experience. And it sounds like from all of our projects, all of our experiences that we bring to students, they take that critical thinking skill away from them.
Absolutely. I'm glad that you're touching on some of these other skills that are developed through this work. I did want to point out what has triggered for me this 10-year reunion is the DC History Conference is coming up, and it's going to be in the spring. And I wanted to point out that the Eaton students were the youngest ever presenters at the DC History Conference, and they presented about their work. And so that was an opportunity for them to stand up in front of a room of probably 50 or more people and share information about their project. So that presentation aspect, which is also with National History Day, also through Story of Our Schools, generally when the exhibition opens, the students are kind of like running the show. They're running the actual program, and they're introducing people from the community, serving as MCs and all of that. So just seeing those kids like blossom, you know, in their power and being the subject matter experts is really something beautiful to see. It's so empowering. So I want to talk a little bit about places. We're in Washington, D.C., and for history, research, and all of that, we're like the most fortunate people on planet Earth, okay, with the National Archives. You all mentioned Cleveland Park Historical Society, Smithsonian Institution, other Folklife Center, the National Building Museum as well. So what has kind of been, I guess, enriching about having access to these spaces at your fingertips? Julian mentioned like breaking this barrier where students don't really understand, like I can go to the National Archives and look at things. I want to hear a little bit about that, where again, I told you we're going to step outside of Sumner. You know, we're very local focused, but these big federal buildings can sometimes be a little scary, and students don't think that they can just walk in there and look at these old documents.
I remember one year, I think it was with the Sacrifice for Freedom group, we actually went to the American History Museum, and they took us back in the archivist area to see things that weren't on display. Because the students thought everything in the museum, that's all they have, is
right
on display. But the archivist said, oh, we have a warehouse here, we have all this other stuff. And even for me, I didn't realize there was so many other artifacts, and we actually pulled out different artifacts and they explained what they were. The students could touch them. They had to wear white gloves. So they felt like archivists. Mm-hmm. I mean, they were archivists at that moment. So just taking advantage of the things that are around us are huge. And really any part of the country, because there are archives all across the country. Yeah. Of course, being in DC, National Archives, but you know, state archives. I've done research, genealogy research in South Carolina. In the South Carolina State Archives. So, you know, we have archives all across the country. And as that archivist told my students in our resume, there are records. So we should take advantage of them.
Anyone else want to share about highlights at other repositories and connecting students to resources?
Jen and I are, you know, same time. Okay, I'll go, then you'll go next time. Well, the weird thing is, I've done behind the scenes work wearing a different cap at John Eaton. So, for example, we often have an auction to raise money, and then the teachers provide or volunteer their time. So you can, sign up with Mr. So-and-so and go for popcorn and a movie, and you can sign up for someone else. And so my colleague and I, we always offer a behind the scenes tour to be determined. And when I told my kids originally that we were doing this, my own children, they said, "Oh, Mom, that is so boring. Who would ever sign up for that?" Oh my God. So lucky for me. Yeah, exactly. And lucky for me, some of the kids that did these programs, or kids that we've had that were very interested in history, and the field trips that we've done for the kids, signed up. One mom said, "Oh, she was waiting for it to close to make sure she got it." It's like, oh, come on, But anyway, with that said, I sort of leveraged my colleagues at the Building Museum. And so, Julian, same point. We went through an exhibition, but then we did a behind the scenes tour in the collections, and they have a great architectural toy collection that's in storage. And then one year we went to Tudor Place, and they have a bomb shelter and Hillwood. Marjorie Merriweather Post has a pink bomb shelter. So all of these kind of fun pieces of history and little down the rabbit hole behind the scenes, some kids are really, really gripped by that stuff. And so, we at John Eaton try to package it and deliver it in all kinds of ways to keep them interested.
Yeah, and I think for us too, it's a field trip destination, right? So again, you're leaving the classroom, and of course we have Metro, right? So all my kids would take the Metro, and you pop out on the mall, and our city's amazing. And sometimes you forget that it's down there. I forget it's down there. You get stuck in your neighborhood and you just do your day to day. But I think for us too, like we've done African American history and culture, and that's right when it opened too. So that was so powerful. I mean, even the teachers, we were all enjoying it. The portrait gallery. When I worked with the Logan kids, Capitol Hill Montessori at Logan, we went to the portrait gallery because their exhibit was really based in like the Civil War era. So we got to see portraits of these people that they were learning about. So again, like just seeing another form of stuff, right? It doesn't have to just be a photograph. It doesn't have to just be, it can be a painting. It can be a sculpture. It can be, digital interface in a museum. It could be a lot of things. So I think having that stuff and not having to pay for it is fantastic, like we're really, really lucky. And most of the Smithsonians, we call them, and they are really excited to have students come through,
That's excellent. Another question, this is really the last one I want to ask, I guess, about some of the process. Each of you mentioned oral histories, and I am fascinated myself. I love stories from everyday, ordinary folks. And, that story about the fireman, that's just incredible. And I would love to hear a little bit about how your students have been engaged with, some of this intergenerational stuff. I was thrilled, to see, Eaton kids from Story of Our Schools, interviewing their fourth graders, interviewing these 80 and 90-year-old folks who oftentimes ended up giving them, their diplomas and other artifacts as well, and it just really speaks to how everybody has a story and a connection. So I'm just fascinated and would love to hear you talk a little bit about the value of oral histories and the students speaking to people in their communities.
For us, that is such an important part, right? Because we're telling community history. And what I love about the oral histories, like when we first started doing them, I was like, oh boy, get a hard drive, get a laptop. I don't really know a microphone, how do we do this? But it is so beautiful to see. So for us, we teach the kids oral history techniques, right? So we teach them about open-ended questions, closed-ended questions, questions that promote more conversation. And let me tell you, I have not sat through an interview where the interviewee didn't have a lot to say. I think people are just so excited to talk to kids, number one, and the kids come up with the questions. So they're basic is the wrong descriptive, but they are so honest and so straightforward, right? And that I've always seen the people we're interviewing just light up, and so one of the big parts of our project too is finding these people, right? Because coming into, I live in Ward 6, but I don't know, community members who might be in Ward 1 or Ward 5 or whatever, right? Like, so how do we find them? Is it through the principal? Is it through the PTA? How do you find these long-time residents? And then, it's a simple call and they come in and they talk to the kids. And for us, for our final exhibits, we'll either pull quotes from those interviews, or we, like for the CHML exhibit, we actually had a digital interface where they could like push a button and hear the kids talk to Vincent Gray. He was an alumni. And so the kids got to interview him. And it's really beautiful to listen to like the kid ask the question and then he gives this very formal response, right? But so, and it's just so important. It's such a big part of our process because I feel like if you're going to tell community history, that's what you need, that, and the kids love it. Sometimes their grandparents come in, it's cool.
I actually had an interesting experience where, so many times I encourage my students to interview other people, but one of my students interviewed me for a StoryCorps. So it was a wonderful experience, and it made me realize that for the person being interviewed, the experience is a gift, because I really appreciated it. But the whole time I was thinking as the interviewer, as the student, just hearing from that person, like you're getting more of it than the person. But after my interview, I felt like I got more out of it than he did, because the questions he asked, it made me think about things that I hadn't thought about in years. Some things not since I was a little kid. So it made me think even more about the interview process and really about what the interviewee is experiencing as it's happening. And it also made me realize why a lot of times when you're interviewing someone, they want to go on and on and on and on, because it's triggering so many memories for that person that they just can't stop because they're just going down memory lane. So that was a great experience for me to be on the other side of something that I'm always asking my students to do, or sometimes that I'm doing myself for my own family history.
So that's the perfect segue into my part, which is we had the students practice before they interviewed people from the community with a grown-up in their household for a few reasons, just to get the hang of it. And while we had the folk life specialists, they interviewed each other just to sort of get a feel for it. But one thing I wanted to add, I agreed with everything with the critical thinking skills and the applicable skills learned in all these projects that serve these kids no matter what they major in. But also part of it was public speaking, which I'm a big stickler about collecting your thoughts and not umming and liking everyone to death. And so when we were getting ready for the oral histories, we had a sheet of do's and don'ts, but then they loved this. My colleague and I would do the bad presentation. So I would fidget a lot and I would interrupt and I would look this way and seem super bored. And she would stop it and say, okay, how did you think Miss Langholtz did? And they'd go, terrible. She was so awful. Why? What did she do wrong? She and she liked and she was distracted and she was looking at that. And so it just really sets the tone where the discovery of it all comes from them. And similarly, when they are docents on their exhibition, you need to stand up straight. You need to rephrase the question, answer it. I don't want to hear it was like, and she was like, and I was like, and it was like, because people aren't going to respect what you're saying. You did all this work. So let it matter. And I'm sure all of you are nodding, thinking we had to do the same thing, make it worthwhile. And so that was a big part of it, having them be poised to gain everything from these other people and take it in a meaningful way. And that took a little tweaking with fourth graders, I'm not going to lie, but.
Absolutely. Well, it shined through. They did fantastic. I'm always impressed with young people. I really am. They're just bright stars once they're given that space to do this kind of work. So this is excellent. I could talk to you all night, but I know we don't have all night. So I want to pause for just a second. I don't know who our viewers are, but if there are any questions or comments that you want to pose to our panelists, please do so in the chat, and we will pick those up. But really, a final question while people are thinking and getting their thoughts together. A question that I have for you all is really, how can we, like as Sumner Museum and Archives, National Archives, all these repositories, we're always wanting to engage students. And me, I value everybody that comes through our doors, but I'm especially sensitive with young folks and want to make sure that their experience is optimal when they come in, because I know how the residue is, as far as like the impact. But what can we do as institutions to support what you're doing in engaging students with archives? How can you help?
I think definitely, and I think all of us has mentioned in some way, shape, or form, some behind the scenes tours. Because in my experiences, students like to feel like they're learning things that other people aren't learning. So, it's like, oh, I'm doing something that most people don't get a chance to do. So I think behind the scene tours could be a great start. And I think also just seeing that connection, like I said earlier, to their daily lives, whether it be interviewing somebody connected to your school or interviewing somebody in your neighborhood, or just seeing a document that's connected to it. I remember a few years ago, I did a project on, students were doing a project on restrictive covenants, and actually showed them the database that they could search for either their home or a house in their neighborhood to see if they ever had any restrictive covenants on it. And they were shocked that deeds are public record. So you could see the deed for any house in DC from its beginning, from when it was built. So just something like that, students realizing they have access to information makes them feel like they have more power than they did before they did the process, because they're learning something new that perhaps a lot of people don't know.
That's excellent. And I will add too, so in addition to students, we also want to know what we can do to support teachers in the classroom too. So ponder on that as well.
Well, I'm not a teacher. I'm not an educator, so I can't speak to that. I'm a museum designer, so I can speak more to the archives part. But I feel like, Kimberly, what Sumner does for us is amazing. I mean, just the fact that my kids can, one, take a field trip, they can come in, they can touch the stuff. And I mean, for anybody who's listening, I feel like what Kimberly and Crystal do with these kids is just so fun, right? Not only do all the stuff is out there with the white gloves and they get to touch it, but then they do these fun bingo games with the kids, right? And you would think it's just this silly thing, but that's what the kids talk about. They win Jolly Ranchers, like they get really excited because they really hone in on like how kids perceive information, and they feel great because they're getting all these answers right, So as far as like what you do for my program, everything is just perfect. It's just wonderful, down the road, and Kimberly, you and I have talked about this before, being with my digital archivist hat on, I would love to see Sumner have a beautiful digital archive with high-res scans that we could just access online whenever we wanted them. But I know that is a huge undertaking.
No, thank you for saying that. No, it's important. We need that.
Well, maybe there's a philanthropist listening tonight. So exactly. You never know. Kimberly, you were my first behind the scenes tour for my little burgeoning archivist, because I remember now the two kids that came and they got to invite somebody. And speaking to Julian's point, she opens this big cabinet of trophies, this big metal cabinet on the third floor behind. And it's like, Wow, so this is a good, I haven't engaged with Kimberly in a while because I wear a lot of hats at John Eaton. So for me, it's a great reminder that I want you to come into some classrooms via Zoom during this crazy COVID time. We've been to Sumner also on the Metro. I never played bingo. We never got Jolly Ranchers, so that's a newer thing. I feel a little left out.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, the Jolly Rancher hit a certain chord for me as well.
Yeah, I mean, we do a lot of fun stuff with Jolly Ranchers. My colleagues and I say the cherry and the sour apple ones are really bad for kids. They can't have those. So we take them because, we wouldn't want anyone to get sick or anything like that. But anyway, that bingo thing sounds fantastic. And anyway, it's a good opportunity for us to re-engage. Absolutely. It sounds like with you and Jen and you and Julian, you have a natural conduit. Every time Jen is working on a project, she's going to contact you. The kids are going to go there. And Julian with National History Day, because I'm doing lots of other things too. It's just a reminder that we need to bring you in when the grades are studying local history and so forth on a regular basis. So I appreciate this, if only for that.
And for the teacher aspect, teacher workshops are wonderful. I've been to many over my time in education, the National Archives, of course. There's one, Library of Congress, they've had things before. So maybe having something like that for teachers, or I'm putting out a request for you, invite for you to come to Roosevelt. Absolutely. Maybe speak with our history teachers because they meet often, at least once a week, and to share the resources at the museum. Food is always great. Teachers love food. Teachers love food. And even more so, if the material is great, if the resource is great, teachers will talk. If something is working, teachers will share it, and they'll share it widely, because that means it's working in the classroom. So, getting teachers on your side and having them share the information, come out and share the information with them, I think is a great place to start.
Well, that's great. I'm taking all of that in. I'm thinking, my wheels are turning, because even with National History Day, and I have another question, speaking of COVID and having to pivot everything, including us on this lovely platform here, which I'm very happy about. But as far as I did National History Day at Roosevelt for 2019, that was my last opportunity. I have the lanyard right at my front door still. And I was really excited to find ways to connect and really support the students in strengthening their research skills, et cetera. The other part is, being that we're a local museum, I'm always looking to go with the theme of National History Day and help students kind of refine locally. As you mentioned, Julian, as a way that they can really connect if it's right in town, as well, and speaking to people with oral history. So that's another way. I'm happy to come to Roosevelt anytime and do little workshops and talks and talk about our resources, or even do things virtually if necessary, where I can do a little show and tell at Sumner. But really exposing the students to local, lesser known people, movements, and things like that may be applicable to National History Day themes. It's one of those kind of feather in another thing I wanted to do that we've kind of had to pivot, but those were thoughts I had back in 2019 to help kids find local topics.
And it made me think, just when you were saying that, all of us in some way, shape, or form, there were community projects.
Yeah.
The community was involved. So I think that's a really important aspect, whether it's directly with the history or inviting judges in from the community. Because I've seen people at the supermarket walking down the street and they'll say, "Hey, Julian, I was a judge for National History Day." So that's amazing. And they're so excited about Roosevelt. Some of them maybe had never been inside Roosevelt, so they don't have kids of their own, high school age. So I think that community aspect, whatever the project is really important.
Absolutely.
Well,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to comment. One of my roles at John Eaton is the best way to describe it. I'm the liaison between the teachers and the staff. So I book all the field trips, I send them out there, I bring all the speakers in, that's my job. And with COVID, a lot of things are virtual, and we've had a lot of good luck of accessing some of our local Smithsonian museums and presenters. And so even I think right now, because I'm back at school just this week, I think a lot of museums are going to be virtual, and I don't know how National History Day will be, or Jen, your ability to work with students directly, because I know everything is kind of restricted, but we could bring you in via Zoom to do how to begin research, or a how-to for with either the third or fourth graders, you know, whichever teams. I think third grade starts researching, and that would be a really good way for you to kind of do a in-school trip. Maybe this year, Kimberly. It's just an idea.
Yep, I'm always open. Well, this has been wonderful. I want to thank you all. I'm not seeing questions, but as I mentioned at the onset, this is recorded. It is available on our YouTube channel and also Facebook as well. But I want to thank you all for joining us this evening. Just a round of applause, and thank you for your work that you're doing with young people. So very critical, these experiences and opportunities that they have at a young age. It really impacts them, you know, throughout their lives. So thank you for your work. And do you have anything else that you want to say in closing out? I just think this was a great, this was our third installment of the Hurlbut-Walker Memorial Research Forum, celebrating Sumner Museum's 35th anniversary. So 35 years. As I mentioned, Richard Hurlbut, he was the founding director, and I've been going back through a lot of the archives connected to Sumner, the institutional history, and it was very clear that Sumner was a space for young folks. It's a space to support the students. It was a space to bring them in to hear from storytellers and griots, to like international music programs, all of these things outside of the scope of schools. But our premise, of course, is to collect the material, culture, history, archives for DC public education that has grown over the years. Really, I didn't tell a little bit about my history, but I've been there 13 years. And when I got there in 2008 at Sumner, almost 24 schools closed at one time. So it was really a space where school history was at risk. So the collection has grown exponentially, and I'm so grateful that there is this space where we can bring students in, where they can touch history and have access to seeing, you know, these old cards with cursive writing from like the 30s, and they're like wowed by that. And being able to go in the board minutes, do this research, touch things, put on white gloves and all of that. So it's a great end to talk about the future, because without young folks getting involved and understanding the value of history, then, you know, it's going to die out. So we want to make sure that we get students, get young people involved and interested and aware of like historical movements, so that it will impact our future. So thank you. At this point, I'm going to end. I want to thank everyone else who joined us this evening, anyone who will see this. If you ever have any questions for us, you can always email us. Again, Eileen, Jennifer, and Julian, thank you for your time. Julian's at school still, okay? So I appreciate you. I know you're all busy folks.
I live close by.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm not driving. I'm walking home. It's a 10-minute walk.
Okay, that's good.
Hopefully get home to down my oldest daughter for bedtime. So
yes, well, I still don't want to hold you up any further, so we're going to end this very quickly. I want to thank Crystal Hurd, our museum program coordinator. She has put in tons of work, logistical work for the entire series, and she is with us behind the scenes in the production room. Please stay connected.
Thank you, Crystal.
Yes, thank you, Crystal.
Thank you, Crystal.
Please stay connected with us via social media at Sumner Museum on Twitter and Instagram, and search for Charles Sumner School Museum and Archives on Facebook. You can also find lots of content, including this video, related to Sumner Museum on our YouTube channel. If you wish to join our mailing list, please send us a message at info www.sumnermuseum@dc.gov. And thank you again for joining us, and good night, everyone.